Hey everybody, welcome to the Briefing Room. I'm Devin Dwyer in Washington. Great to have you with us today. We have some breaking news out of the Pentagon coming up. Our global affairs anchor Martha Raddatz is standing by. We hear from two sides in the growing debate over tariffs against China. Two business people with starkly different views, including one who sells fireworks. You'll want to stay tuned for that. But we start today with President Trump's big 2020 re-election campaign kickoff, and we're joined with our Deputy Political Director, Mary Alice Parks is here, and we're joined in Florida from our Trump campaign political reporter, Will Steeken, who I believe is outside the venue. Will, we see you there. It's great to see you. Looks like the shot's freezing a little bit. It's been stormy down in Florida. But Mary Alice, why don't you kick us off here as we look at this picture of the live crowd. Why is President Trump starting his 2020 bid in Florida? How important is that state?
Well, math. There's 29 electoral college votes in Florida, Devin, and it's hard to imagine a scenario where President Trump is able to win a re-election if he doesn't secure those 29 votes. He considers himself practically a Florida resident. Obviously, he spends a lot of time at his golf course and his club, Mar-a-Lago. His own staff refers to it as the Winter White House. And it was the state that really helped put him over the edge. He barely won over Hillary Clinton in 2016, but what a win that was. It is just such a big state with so many votes. It is increasingly split politically. We've seen the blue parts of the state get bluer, the red parts of the state get redder. And if he can win there again, he'd be well on his way to securing another victory.
And the Trump campaign's been talking up a big game about tonight's big kickoff celebration. Big crowds, hundreds of thousands of tickets requested by voters. But it remains to be seen how many people will actually turn out there. We just saw a live picture. It is wet. It is soggy. Will Steeken, what's the scene like out there in Orlando?
So it's kind of been a story of two events here today. In the morning, it was bright, sunny, people were dancing here. And then about a couple of hours into that, rain started pouring down. Rallygoers threw out their umbrellas, and that's kind of the situation we're at now. I'm actually multiple blocks away. I don't even know how many blocks away. And this line is wrapping around multiple blocks. Thousands of people lined up. There was thousands of people earlier for what they were calling 45 Fest. They had like food trucks and all kinds of live music out there, and and everyone's excited here to see the president speak. I've heard people saying they want to see the Trump rally that everyone sees at home. They want to see the fireworks, the verbal fireworks from the president. And they want to see what he's going to do for this re-election kickoff. Devin.
Yeah, there's still a lot of interest in the president and enthusiasm for the president as he kicks off what a campaign, Mary Alice, it seems like it hasn't ever ended since 2016. And as Will has pointed out previously, we're still hearing a lot of the same crowd applause lines that he used in 2016. Lock her up, as an example.
Yeah, this is a president that has really blurred those lines between being a candidate and a politician and a president. At a lot of his official White House events, he starts talking like a candidate again. But this is going to be an actual rally. So we expect all the red meat to come out. I imagine a lot of the favorite lines. He'll want to play the highlights, and especially for a crowd that came just for that.
Yeah, one of those lines he's throwing out to the crowd in advance of his arrival in Florida was this tweet he sent overnight that's getting a lot of attention. The president threatening to deport next week millions of undocumented immigrants in this country. It's caused a lot of consternation and fear in immigrant communities in the United States. Of course, it raises questions about how this would be done. The Immigrations and Customs Enforcement just deported just a little over 200,000 people last year. It's not clear they have resources to deport millions of people. But Mary Alice, you were saying this is a playbook that is familiar for President Trump as campaign season gets heating up.
Right. We were just talking about how he was able to win Florida in 2016. That helped him win overall. And he ran largely on immigration. Back in 2016, he ran on not only the border wall, but this concept of a deportation force that he would really bolster deportations across the country. But it's important to remember that ahead of 2018, he also ran on immigration again. In the last few weeks before voting last November, he talked about that big caravan that was about to cross the border.
Wow.
And we all talked here in the press, and those of us that were following the campaign closely, that this seemed like he was trying again to levy his base up to get those more conservatives.
It didn't really work. I mean, it never really took hold.
That's exactly what I was going to say. I think you're exactly right. In Florida, the Republicans lost several seats, and obviously nationwide, the Republicans lost 40. Democrats had one of the biggest midterm years on record. So we don't know whether this play to really focus on immigration will work or will backfire.
And as the president arrives in Florida today, he does face some opposition on the ground there, stiff opposition. In fact, the Orlando Sentinel, the major newspaper in the Orlando area, came out right as the campaign is getting started with a non-endorsement for Donald Trump. The paper writes that there's really no need to evaluate his candidacy. There's no need to wait for a Democratic candidate. They're not endorsing him. And then there's this new poll that just came out just an hour or so ago from Quinnipiac University showing a bunch of hypothetical matchups in Florida, very close against some of the lower tier candidates, if you will, O'Rourke and others. But look at that with a matchup with Biden, Sanders. Donald Trump appears to be far behind at this stage in the race, Mary Alice, and that would seem to align with what we've heard from the internal campaign polls there from the Trump campaign.
Yeah, there's some rumors that even the internal polling had him down, and down by big numbers in some of those swing states. And if that were to hold, we'd be looking at a huge wipeout. But we know that we have to take all polls with a total grain of salt right now. It's just too early.
And Will Steeken down there in Florida, as you're in touch with your sources in the campaign, how are they feeling about Florida? What are you hearing as they kick this off? You've had some sources that about the leaking of these internal polls suggest that there's a little bit of concern there.
They are concerned, but I mean, it's no question that Florida is essential, and they know it's essential. They wouldn't be kicking off their, re-election campaign here in Florida if it wasn't. And yeah, those numbers that, ABC got a hold of showing that I believe Biden was up by 7 internally back in March is something that kind of kicked them into high gear. Some of my sources were told me the day those polls were passed around internally was, quote, a bad day for the campaign and for everyone involved. So, yeah, I mean, that's why they're here. They know that they need to win this to win the re-election, and it's a pretty big turnout, and so, yeah. Devin.
All right, Will Steeken is going to be covering events on the ground there all night tonight. This is supposed to be what they called the 45 Fest, a big cookout and live music. It looks very soggy down there in Orlando right now. Will, thanks for braving the elements for us. We'll see you later on. Mary Alice, you and I were talking before the show today that one of the big themes tonight the president's going to drag out is promises made, promises kept. So we thought we'd take a look at some of the big promises the president made on the campaign trail in 2016, see how he measured up. Let's start with perhaps the biggest one of all, relating to health care, a top issue on voters' minds, and Obamacare. Here's the president.
We're going to deliver real change that once again puts America first. That begins with immediately repealing and replacing the disaster known as Obamacare. Repealing Obamacare and stopping Hillary's health care takeover is one of the single most important reasons that we must win.
All right, so we remember that promise very well. It was repeated quite often, and let's put up our promise tracker. We give this one a changed rating, pretty far down from kept, Mary Alice, because the Obamacare is still the law of the land here in year 3 of the Trump presidency, though there have been some significant changes to it.
Right. They did succeed in one Republican priority. They got rid of the individual mandate. It was a crucial part of the original Obamacare law. There's now a lot of court cases working their way sort of up the system as to whether the entire law will be able to stand now that there's no longer that individual mandate. And they've made some big changes on the regulatory front, too. Now they can sell on those Obama marketplaces some shorter, high-deductible plans. That was a priority. Much more bare bones, kind of stopgap plans. That was a priority for some Republican senators. But speaking of Republican senators, obviously this president continues to blame John McCain for that one big vote that went down. They were not able to pass the Republican health care alternative to Obamacare.
Yeah, and there is no still clear Republican alternative to Obamacare on the table. The president just this week said he's drafting again a new proposal on that. We shall see. And costs, of course, as all of us know, if we engage with the healthcare system, continue to skyrocket. Okay, let's move on to the next big promise from 2016. This one, we don't need to play any sound for. It was President Trump said that Mexico will pay for a border wall along the southern U.S. border. So where does that stand? Here's our promise tracker on the southern border wall. We give that a changed and in progress. Changed because there's no more talk of Mexico explicitly paying for that.
That's true.
Mary Alice.
That part has changed.
But there is some progress. We should note there, Quinn Owen, who tracks immigration here at ABC News, tells me that 0 new miles of new construction along the border wall have been completed, although they have, I guess, refurbished about 45 miles or so of border wall that was crumbling and needed to be updated. So a bit of a mixed bag there, but certainly no sea to shining seawall, and no more talk about Mexico footing the bill.
Right, but again, this wall that he has hit with the U.S. Congress. We saw Capitol Hill multiple times reject his plan to use government funds to build a wall. He said he was going to declare a national emergency to use defense funds to build a wall, and he's going forward with that plan, even though there was a big push on Capitol Hill to override his use of a national emergency funds for that purpose.
And here's a third promise we're tracking today. Here's President Trump from 2016.
Our roads are bad, our schools are bad, our highways, our tunnels, our bridges are falling down. So we're going to get our infrastructure taken care of. It's going to be in jobs, but we have to do it for our country.
All right, we'll get our infrastructure taken care of. That $1 trillion plan that was going to fix all those potholes and repair LaGuardia Airport. It's unclear where that stands, Mary Alice. Just a couple weeks ago.
I like flying into LaGuardia.
I don't know about that, but the president did say he was ready to spend $2 trillion, get his party on board. He brought Nancy Pelosi in. There was all this camaraderie over infrastructure, and yet we are stalled.
Right, from day one, we said that this was the area where there was bipartisan agreement. Both sides seem to want to spend money and work on this, and yet over and over, it's become a running joke here in D.C. that they can't even get in the same room to discuss an infrastructure package. Just last month, we had the president really threatening Democrats, saying if they don't stop some of those investigations, he's not going to go forward on infrastructure at all.
And let's take a fourth and final promise today. This one involving the president's promise to get rid of NAFTA. Let's put up our promise tracker there. That's actually in progress. Some success for President Trump back in November. He renegotiated NAFTA with Canada and Mexico. He's calling it the USMCA, the U.S.-Mexico and Canada agreement. It has been signed. We were there in Argentina for that, but Congress, Mary Alice, hasn't approved it yet. It's going to be a bit of a battle to get that sealed.
Right. New treaties have to be ratified by Congress, and we haven't even started that fight.
All right. Thanks so much, Mary Alice. Great for your political analysis. We'll have much more coverage of the president's big re-election campaign rally later tonight here on ABC News Live, and tomorrow here in the briefing room as well. Thanks, Mary Alice. Let's bring in now our senior global affairs, chief global affairs anchor and expert from the Pentagon. Martha Raddatz is here as Mary Alice takes her bow out.
We're a ballet here. Just a ballet after
we
you.
have some breaking news out of the Pentagon, Martha. Just a short time ago, another big shakeup.
Another big shakeup,
and
really surprising, and no surprise that it was announced by tweet, which is the acting Secretary of Defense, Patrick Shanahan, has removed his name from confirmation.
He removed it, or Trump removed him?
Well, Trump announced it, that he had removed, that Shanahan had removed his name from confirmation, and to spend more time with his family. And that family is really at the center of the reason he is removing his name from this, because details are coming out now that his family had, in less than a decade ago, some very serious domestic violence incidents involving the Washington Post. First reported this today, saying that Shanahan's wife once punched him in the face. They have no comment from her. We've also reached out to her as well. But police records also show that Shanahan's son, who was 17 at the time, beat his mother with a baseball bat, was arrested for beating his mother with a baseball bat.
And this is perhaps one reason why this confirmation was hung up for so long. I mean, he's been acting Secretary of Defense for quite some time.
He was also confirmed as Deputy Secretary of Defense several years ago, and this did not come up, certainly in public. And Shanahan says now it would just be too painful for his family to go through this again, and that they have been healing all these years. He and his wife are divorced, but he did have all 3 of his children behind him at his confirmation hearing for Deputy Secretary of defense.
And this is very significant. We should remind people, I mean, this is the head of the Defense Department, the largest agency in government at such a critical time with threats from North Korea, Iran, wars going on still in Afghanistan. This is huge.
Shanahan was, approving 1,000 more troops to the Middle East because of what he called the threats to our forces from Iran in the sea, in the air, on the ground.
So who's going to replace him? Who did President Trump name?
It's the current Secretary of the Army, Esper, and he is a West Point grad, graduated the same year from West Point, 1986, as Mike Pompeo. So there's a very strong Army presence there. Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense,
current Secretary of the Army. So he was confirmed as well.
Yes,
to this role.
He's
passed
clearly
muster once already.
Yes, he has. Yes, he has. Esper, very well respected in the Pentagon. I think that will be a pretty seamless crossover.
And Esper will take over, before we let you go, at a time when this tension with Iran is really at a level we haven't seen in years. A short time ago, the Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, who was visiting CENTCOM, as you know.
And very unusual.
Which is very unusual to see a Secretary of State at CENTCOM. But he came out to address the threats and why those troops, as you said, were sent to Iran.
We are there to deter aggression. President Trump does not want war, and we will continue to communicate that message while doing the things that are necessary to protect American interests in the region.
And not sent to Iran, but sent to the Middle East, I should say.
Yes.
But what does all this mean, Martha? And as you sort of put this into some context, this deployment of 1,000 troops after 1,500 troops just a few weeks ago, I think a lot of people are wondering, are we gearing up? Is this a military buildup of some kind for some action?
I think part of this, you had Pompeo down at CENTCOM, but part of this is a diplomatic push. Like, look what we're doing. Let me just reinforce the fact that we can do something to you if you don't want to come to the negotiating table. As you know, I was in Iran a few weeks ago too, and they are being equally as stubborn about all this. But both sides, in most parts of both sides, some in Iran say we're headed for a conflict, but you heard the president of Iran saying we don't want war either. You've heard President Trump say we don't want war either, although he did say in an interview last night with Time that if it was about a nuclear weapon, that might happen. And at the very heart of this is President Trump saying he will not allow Iran to get a nuclear weapon.
And he has sort of vacillated on whether he's willing to talk to Iran over that very proposition. Martha Raddatz, thank you so much.
You bet.
You'll continue to monitor that situation. Much more from you on World News Tonight. Our thanks to Martha Raddatz. Now to the trade war with China that's affecting hundreds of thousands of American businesses and prices for American consumers. The president tweeted just a short time ago that President Xi of China will meet with him next week at the G20 in Japan. Our respective teams, he said, will begin talks prior to that meeting. The administration has been holding listening sessions on tariffs here in the United States. They've been getting an earful ahead of that meeting. Our Terry Moran, senior national correspondent, was recently up in Baltimore. He got an earful as well from one company that thinks the tariffs are a good idea.
How has China's unfair trade practices impacted you?
China does many things to negatively impact Marlin. For example, they steal our intellectual property. They copy and paste my website onto their own website. Sometimes they do such a bad job, they keep our part numbers in the cutting and pasting. And even worse, sometimes they even inadvertently keep our name in the cutting and pasting, okay? They subsidize their steel, they subsidize the labor. They foul their environment. We're very good stewards to the environment. We care about the Chesapeake Bay, which is right 4 miles away from where we're sitting. So we need competitors that are fighting a fair fight. And right now it's not fair.
So they just steal the stuff you design and sell.
They steal our products and they copy and paste it, and then they pretend it's invented by them. We spend a tremendous amount of money with our engineers, our mechanical engineers, developing patents and coming up with very innovative, high-tech ways to solve clients' problems. But they just steal it. It's not right. America has to protect its manufacturing base. And we just want to have a fair transaction. They don't steal from us, we don't steal from them, and then we game on.
And that's Drew Greenblatt, the president of Marlin, which is a steel manufacturing fabrication company up in Baltimore. Terry Moran is here. Terry, it does seem that that sentiment is a bipartisan one. There's this feeling that we've been getting ripped off for way too long, and a lot of people, like Drew, like to see that someone's doing something about it.
Well, that story has been repeated on a small scale, like Marlin, and on big scale, like in the solar panel industry, right across America for decades now. And the question is what to do about it, of course. What he will tell you, and what he told us, was, he found his products being completely copied. It didn't look like it from some of the pictures, but these are very innovative solutions, the kinds of things. He'll make a tray for fuel injectors so that the robots at General Motors can move efficiently and automatedly construct the engine of a GM car. And he makes that. But it got ripped off within months. They basically copied it. They sell it now in the United States for less than the cost of the steel. And
so he's pretty happy with what Trump's doing.
He's very happy. Look, this is something that people like him have been advocated. Polls show about a third of Americans think the tariffs are a really good idea. More people don't think it's a very good idea. But you do see some support primarily because of issues like that.
Speaking of people who don't think it's a good idea, we know the administration this week's been holding some listening sessions about the possibility of imposing tariffs on more than $300 billion of additional Chinese imports. A group of 660 American companies actually sent a letter to President Trump yesterday about all this. They said, we know firsthand the additional tariffs will have a significant negative long-term impact on American businesses, farmers, and families. Broadly applied, they say, they're not an effective tool to change China's unfair trade practices. And they say that tariffs are taxes and that we are paying those taxes, not China. One of those companies joins us now, a couple representatives joins us now live from Youngstown, Ohio, Bill Weimer and Bruce Zoldan with Phantom Fireworks. Great to see you guys. Thanks so much for joining us. Your company has been hit particularly hard because all these fireworks that people use on 4th of July are made in China.
Correct. Actually, this country, of all the fireworks that the United States imports, they import 97.75% of the fireworks from China. It's pretty overwhelming.
And I take it as, even though the president says perhaps you could move production here to the States, that's a non-starter.
There actually used to be a certain amount of fireworks production in the States, but that's been history for 25 years.
And Bruce, you met with President Trump recently and directly appealed to him on these tariffs. What did you say to him, and how was your message received?
Well, I was with a group of businessmen in diversified businesses, and we just talked about the tariffs and how they would affect the ultimate consumer in the United States. And certainly he was listening, and I really most of the time was spent with higher officials at the White House, and they were all sympathetic to what I was saying, but holding on to the fact that China needed to be punished for what they felt were predatory issues and unfair trade. And they said, hopefully a deal will be made. And I think today we see that might be a possibility with the announcement that he has a meeting set next week.
You're hopeful about that meeting and holding your breath. Terry, you asked Drew Greenblatt, who had a very different view of these tariffs up in Baltimore, about the concerns of folks like Bill and Bruce. What's kind of the answer on the other side to those concerns?
Well, there's no question. He feels that this is a necessary fight for manufacturers like him and others, that there was a bet that was made on China about 20 years ago when they came into the WTO, that if we let them into the world trading system in an open and free way, they would change. Well, they did change. They got a lot richer and a lot less free. And they subsidize their products, they dump them, they steal intellectual property and use the state intelligence agencies to commit corporate espionage. So it's a big problem. There's no question about it. But tariffs are such a blunt instrument. As you guys say, it's consumers who pay them. And the
question is, do they work? Can they change China's behavior?
Well, that's what we're going to find out. And so in the meantime, people are getting clobbered by these tariffs. And I did ask Drew about that, and here's what he had to say about what happens.
We don't have the sound queued up,
okay.
but we take your analysis of how he articulated it. And Bill, before we let you go, I just want to go back to you, because if these additional tariffs of $300 billion are imposed after this meeting at the end of the month, what will that mean for your business? How devastating would that be?
It would be pretty devastating. The problem is there's no alternative source for us to get the fireworks. We have to stay with China. China has been good to us. We don't have issues of piracy that I've heard on the show as we were sitting here. We have friends there, but the problem is they've been making these fireworks for 1,000 years. They're the experts. There just is no available production in this country or any other country that would be a substitute to what China provides to us.
An important reminder as we head into fireworks season here on the 4th of July. Bill Weimer, thank you so much with Phantom Fireworks in Youngstown, Ohio. Bruce Zoldan, the president of the company as well. Thank you both very much. Appreciate your thoughts on this. And Terry Moran, thanks for your reporting here in the briefing room. Finally today, I want to introduce you to some pretty impressive high school students from around the country that are on Capitol Hill today. A bunch of entrepreneurs in town for the Junior Achievement National Student Leadership Summit. These are students who have created new companies that are actually meeting unmet needs in our country and making some money at the same time. Our Matt Seiler is up on Capitol Hill and talked to some of these kids. Matt, what's going on up there? What are some of these companies selling?
Hi, Devin. Yeah, what we have behind me right now are 15 teams from across the country, all made up of high school students. They're all showing off these companies that they've built, real companies that are being judged, and they all have a chance to win some scholarship money. We've seen a lot of eco-friendly type of products. A couple of companies were very interesting in that they're selling something that's sort of making a positive out of a negative, something coming out of tragedy. One of those was some students from Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School out of Parkland, Florida, who are working on some sort of aromatherapy beads that they sell as a bracelet, the genesis of which came out of the tragedy in 2018.
We actually came up with our own product, which is a bracelet right here with little lava beads that are actually infused to soak up the oils that come with it, which is a mix of lavender eucalyptic, a mix that you cannot find anywhere else. And basically, if you put a few drops in the lava beads, it'll last you about 3 days. And if you smell it every once in a while, it helps you with stress and anxiety, all that good stuff. Also, 10% of our profits go to Parkland Cares, as it's a non-profitable organization that helps people that have gone through tragedies like I have as well.
We created Vibes, which will vibrate at a low heart rate set by the user. And it'll vibrate when it detects that you're falling asleep, because when you're falling asleep, your heart rate starts to drop. So it'll vibrate when it sees that your heart rate is below what it should be. So it'll vibrate and you'll wake up at the wheel before you crash.
All right, the aspiring future business leaders of this country. And Matt Seiler, you got a great look at some of those products. Much more from you online. Thanks so much for bringing us that, Matt. And a salute to those kids in the Junior Achievements National Student Leadership Summit here in the briefing room. Thank you for watching us today on this very busy Tuesday here in Washington. I'm Devin Dwyer. We're here every day, 3:30 Eastern Time, 5:30 and 6:30 as well on ABC News Live. Hope to see you tomorrow.